It's been confirmed by Kuro that Wuthering Waves will conclude its version 1 cycle after 1.4, much earlier than I think most of us were expecting, meaning the next update will be version 2, likely featuring a brand new expansion and a mountain of extra content, I'm sure. Gacha games that go down this type of development cycle, version 1, version 2, version 3 and so on, tend to have a predictable formula when it comes to gameplay, with the supplementary versions, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc. usually only coming in the form of extra content like events and characters, perhaps a map expansion here and there, while the actual versions consist of, among the aforementioned things, potential changes to the game's overall engine and experience, or a noticeable shift in character design, capability, and subsequently meta. I'm led to assume WuWa plans to go in that direction too, otherwise they wouldn't make such a big deal out of each version and instead just make it a build number like most other mobile gachas, having big expansions come in at random times throughout the year. If I'm right and they do plan to make a big splash in version 2 with new gameplay updates, I wanted to make a video discussing some issues I take with the game's current character and team building landscape in the hopes that version 2 will address them next year. The focal point of this game is of course the combat. Credit where credit is due, WuWa's mechanics and game flow are among the best I've seen, especially in the gacha department. From attack strings to swap cancelling animations, tandem attacking, dodging, parrying, mid-air swaps, air dashing, all facets of movement both in overworld exploration and combat feel intuitive and smooth, which is a huge aspect of a hack-and-slash beat-em-up action game like WuWa. On the other end of things, the types of content we have are also fairly well made, with a variety of engines taxing our ability to understand patterns, react accordingly, and dodge or parry critical enemy attacks to achieve a more efficient clear and stay alive. I am thoroughly impressed by how fluid everything is. I don't think a single player would argue the game's combat feels bad to play. If every open-world action RPG gacha was made with the same framework as WuWa, I would not complain in the slightest. They say it's catered more towards hardcore players, but I think even casuals can get the hang of it after moderate practice. Individually speaking, I also love how open-ended the characters are. Despite everyone having a basic skill in Ultimate, their forte circuits are where Kuro can get really creative, as it can theoretically take the form of anything and allow units to stand out from one another, leading to very unique playstyles between DPS units, from Shangliao to Jian to Jinchi to Yinlin to Changli to Camellia to Encore, so on and so forth. While there may be a basic template all units go by, at the same time their combat is distinguished fairly well, no two units play the same. Moreover, the presence of an intro and outro skill along with animation cancels by swapping leads to a deceptively high skill ceiling, rewarding players who further delve into the various interactions between units. And additionally, when you account for universal defensive systems like parrying and dodging, it also makes it so you can technically run no party at all, choosing instead to solo bosses or tower floors with just a single unit, assuming you have the DPS to actually do so. Structurally speaking, I find Wuthering Waves' combat and character design to be considerate towards the player's own skill level and playstyle preference rather than imposing a set number of win conditions or methods of attack. But with the game having been out for half a year at this point, a few things came to my attention that, while not exactly a major problem now, could become one in the future if not addressed. The fortunate thing is that all these problems have easy solutions. In fact, they've already started working on them in this current version. The hallmark experience of a gacha game is to complete the Pokédex in a manner of speaking, to obtain and make use of as many characters within the game as possible, and to continuously go after the new ones that come out. If you were to look at a regular hack-and-slash game and compare them to a gacha hack-and-slash game, what's the main difference? The main difference is that gacha hack-and-slashes have a ton of characters to choose from and expectedly a ton of party compositions you can work with, whereas in say Devil May Cry you're expected to mostly stay on Dante and then Nero in the newer installments, with maybe the opportunity to play a couple more characters. The focus is more on the mechanics of you, the player, along with equipment selection and whatnot. WuWa attempts to bridge the gap together by doing a mixture of both, giving characters unique playstyles and attributes while still leaving the door open for player agency and expression. Unlike in other gachas where there's only so much you can do with a bad character, in WuWa the weakest unit in the game can solo the hardest content if you're good enough. Thing is, it's kind of hard to give both aspects the proper attention, and where you'll find this mostly on display is in the realm of team building. For gachas, the focus is on team building. Like if you go into any other game, team building is everything. You can't just take a ragtag group of mismatched units and YOLO your way through. Granted, some games are more lenient about it than others, and there will always be units whose selling point is that you can pair them with virtually anyone and they'll perform on a meta-relevant level. But there still is a big focus on teams, therefore a big focus on obtaining many characters. Personal mechanics and decision making do matter of course, but the idea is to have the right team to handle whatever content you're about to face. In contrast, WuWa's team building feels more like an afterthought, taking a backseat in favor of basically skill issue. As such, the game's roster has been constructed in a way that focuses more on the individual and less on the team, reducing the amount of options or niches available for future units. Presently, traditional team building conventions go as follows. You have your main attacker, and then what I like to informally call the backup dancer, as in they can deal meaningful DPS of their own, but their main purpose is to set up the main attacker. Then finally support, and by support I'm mostly referring to healers. The synergistic aspect of team building is primarily housed in one's outro skill. For example, Camellia's best partner is Sanhua because Sanhua gives a metric ton of basic attack deep and on her outro skill. You can make a case to include the 20% attack on her S6, but by and large, Sanhua's entire existence is to just give an outro skill to Camellia. Some teams elect to instead run two main attackers fighting alongside each other through liberal usage of quick swapping like Changli and Yinlin, but broadly speaking, it's main attacker, backup dancer, and healer. Where's the issue with this? The issue is that compared to other gachas, where you have characters working in concert with one another to achieve a collective goal greater than the sum of their individual parts, the impression I get from WuWa is that it's just mostly individual units being put together, purely for the sake of it being convenient to do so, not necessarily having actual synergistic playstyles. Anytime there is one, it's only to fuel the main attacker, implying that really the only way to go about WuWa's team building is vertical investment, leaving very little, if any, incentive to go for horizontal investment. Vertical investment denotes pulling all resources and attention into one character, getting them as strong as humanly possible, and using that one character to steamroll the entire game. It's the equivalent of going through an entire Pokemon playthrough with exclusively your starter Pokemon, catching nothing else. Horizontal investment emphasizes making a bunch of characters and working on them enough to be usable, allowing for multiple teams, multiple combinations, and instead choosing to look at the central mechanics of the game more than the individual units. Vertical investment essentially has it so you make a single unit so powerful, even if they're in a disadvantageous matchup or situation, they can clear the game's content through sheer force, whereas horizontal investment's all about character selection and planning. A well-designed gacha game ideally gives players the freedom to choose either or, and more crucially, rewards players for choosing either or. At the moment, there really is no incentive to horizontally invest in WuWa beyond getting the necessary teams to 30-30 clear Tower of Adversity. Reason being, there's no central mechanics or combat engines. The game wasn't designed around things like type matchups or battle mechanics or elemental combinations. It was mostly designed for individual characters. To be fair, it's not like similar gacha titles didn't have this issue early on as well. The first year of any new gacha game is all about just having enough units to play with, and then subsequent years do the actual fleshing out the roster through intentional unit design. WuWa in particular released comparatively less new characters in the first version, not to mention version 1's already ending and it's not even a full year in. Again, not objectively a bad thing in a vacuum, but in the context of a gacha game, it's kind of counterintuitive. On one end, Wuthering Waves inadvertently is one of the most free-to-play friendly gachas of its kind in that you're not pressured to pull for a ton of characters. You just need 3 attackers, 3 backups, and 3 healers, and you're good to go. It's not like in Genshin where you gotta think about all these elemental reactions, or Starl where you have to think about all the various combat engines and gimmicks, or Blue Archive where you have to think about blue units, red units, yellow units, I hear they have purple units now, frontline, backline, all that stuff. In WuWa, you could just pick a character, give them gear, get them a partner with a natural skill or buff that helps them out, and then just get good at dodging and parrying, and you win. It's great if you're the type of player with a preference for that kind of gameplay, but fundamentally, it conflicts with what a gacha game is about. A bunch of different characters to account for a bunch of different scenarios. The biggest area where the lack of party building and strategy hurts the most would be in character selection. In all honesty, the 6 elements mean virtually nothing at the moment. There may be bosses who resist a certain elemental type, but that's the most rudimentary system you have for typing. Along with, I suppose, the Echo Set bonus. There's no reward for going a Mono Glacial or a Mono Fusion or a Mono Havoc team. No reward for combinations of elements like Electro, Spectro, or Fusion Arrow. Nothing like that. In addition, since there aren't that many combat engines in the game, the support category is effectively non-existent. Prior to Shorekeeper, it became a meme that Verena was guaranteed to be in every single party for no reason besides being the best healer. Pragmatically speaking, there's not a single reason for you to choose Baitu if Verena is available. Past healers, characters who specialize in a certain gimmick, namely supportive ones, have been knocked down in relevance for being either too disruptive to the carry's actual attacks or simply not dealing enough damage. Take Jianxin for example. She's an excellent character who can do a ton of things, from shielding to healing to AoE damage to crowd control and whatnot, but she's seen as objectively inferior to most units in light of having effectively no forte circuit and giving less buffs and defensive utility than other healers. Yang Yang's in a similar position where she can crowd control, can battery, and provide some buffs on the side, but because she's not a dedicated buffer and healer while also not being a DPS unit, she has trouble finding a good spot in the meta. That's one downside to having universal defensive mechanics like parrying and dodging. It kinda shuts down any practical reason to make a tank support or any ancillary class. What I'm mostly concerned about regarding the current state of Wuthering Waves is that even though there's a lot of experiential distinction between characters, there's not enough practical distinction between characters. By extension, not enough rules or aspects to incentivize team building and planning, leading to the possibility that every unit gets compared to every unit. If a character comes out, even if they have a unique aspect to them, because there's no infrastructure in place for that unique aspect to make a difference, they'll end up being leveled against the rest of the cast. My theory for why Kuro is not producing that many characters compared to other gachas is, unlike in other games where they have to in order to give all formats enough units for a place to start working on, WuWa doesn't really have that. And so they have to be conservative with releasing characters, lest that would power creep the game really fast. For example, Camellia just came out, right? Though she's the only 5-star Havoc unit in the game, people aren't comparing her to just Danshin and Havoc Rover. They're also comparing her against Changli, Shangli Yao, Encore, Jian, and Jinxi. The next DPS unit will also be compared against everyone else, regardless of their element. Any backup dancer unit will instantly be compared to every existing backup dancer unit. Every supporter healer will instantly be compared to every existing supporter healer. There's very little, if any, categorization between WuWa's characters, which can also make units feel generic. Oh, he's just another generic attacker. Oh, she's another generic healer. It's not a, oh, he's a first glacial support, she's a first arrow driver, what have you. Characters are what makes a gacha game memorable and enjoyable, not just in terms of personality, appearance, and background, but also their place in the meta. In WuWa, it's less about the characters and more about how good you are at dodging, parrying, and understanding timings. Nothing wrong with that, but it takes away focus from the character. Over in Genshin, for instance, people love Zhongli despite having fallen off considerably in the meta as a result of the history he had in the meta of making life easy for you. He was defined by that. I know it's only been 6 months, but I have a hard time finding a clear definition for characters in WuWa. Elements don't matter, attack style doesn't really matter, it's just can you parry and dodge and do your rotation properly. At the end of the day, I feel like Wuthering Waves' combat has a ton of depth to it, but not enough width, if that makes sense. It's good for players who care only about the mechanics of the game, but the majority of gacha players play gacha games to collect a bunch of units and plan out a bunch of parties. As stated before, fortunately there are easy fixes to this. For starters, Kuro is already experimenting with party mechanics, one of which being the Dream Link, which came alongside the new event in version 1.4, allowing all 3 units to attack in concert for big DPS and explosions and whatnot. While currently this is only available in the event, they could expand more on this in the future, perhaps give actual significance to the elements that are doing it. No, I'm not saying they should become a Genshin clone and make elemental reactions. What I am saying is that they need to add more universal mechanics to encourage the use of different characters and add more layers to team building than just outro skill deepens. That way, maybe there might be a scenario where you want to use Yohu over Shorekeeper or Jinshin over Verena. Furthermore, they can work to build on their various combat engines a bit more. Jinxi, for example, wants to pair with characters who specialize in coordinated attacks like Zhezi, or Changli and Yinlin pair nicely together due to each of them swap cancelling for the other very nicely. If they create more engines, that gives players the incentive to pull for and build characters who work best in that engine. Right now, there's no difference between hypercarry and swap cancel teams, it's merely personal preference, but if they make it so there is a difference, then there would be a compelling reason to go for those teams. Overall, at the risk of pissing off a bunch of players with this take, WuWa's combat gives off a Sword Art Online sort of vibe, where every character is one class. The combat needs more systems and gameplay elements in place to make it as rich as possible. The mechanics and foundation are there, it just needs to expand the menu a bit. I guess you can say Wuthering Waves has the exact opposite problem as Genshin. The immense breadth of Genshin's gameplay, from characters to elemental reactions to combinations and stuff, is held back by the lack of substance in its combat in that there's nothing to put them to the test. The sheer depth of WuWa's gameplay, from parrying to dodging to movement to swap cancelling and stuff, is held back by the lack of practical character distinction and systems to complement it. Genshin's very wide but shallow, WuWa's very deep but narrow. Long story short, my hope for version 2 is that they expand more on team building and things that make every character feel unique. I like the game's combat a lot, I just think they zeroed in too much on making it an individual focused game and not a team focused one, which is what gachas are all about, teams. I can't recall a single gacha out there that doesn't have a robust team building metagame. What do you guys think about this? Do you agree with my stance or do you disagree? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. That's it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at FarsFarum, join my Discord server, and check out my other Wuthering Waves discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.